This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 583, entitled How to Convert a Monoconscious Male Feminist into a Biconscious Masculist. Description. Since male feminists are still male, they can be a more formidable source of opposition to the masculists than monoconscious feminists. So it's in masculist self-interest to develop techniques to persuade monoconscious male feminists to become biconscious masculists. This flyer presents some of the arguments that biconscious masculists can use for this task. The flyer itself. How to convert a monoconscious male feminist into a biconscious masculist, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. In 2012, Dr. Warren Farrell spoke at the University of Toronto in Canada on men's lib issues. A group of feminists and male feminists protested at that talk, eventually setting off the fire alarm that shut down the talk. You can see these scenes at, and then I give the link, you have to look at the flyer itself to get the link, around the 2100 minute mark. What was interesting was that the male feminists made more noise and dominated the yelling than the feminists. This is not surprising, since male feminists are still male, with 10 times the testosterone levels in their blood than the feminists, who are still female. I've had personal experience with male feminists. For example, one time I was walking around my local university, that's Melbourne University, near the Student Union building, when I came across a feminist handing out flyers. So I took one. She was accompanied by, probably, her boyfriend, who would have to be a male feminist for such a relationship to work. I mentioned to him, quote, "Have you heard about divorce rape? Gender oppression is a two-way street, you know." End quote. He sneered, looking at me as though I was an antediluvian dinosaur, whereas I saw him in the same light, since from my perspective he was monoconscious and knew nothing about how women oppress men. He, like most feminists, had been totally brainwashed that gender oppression is strictly a one-way street, that it is men who are the oppressors and women who are the oppressed. As the boyfriend of the feminist, he probably felt strongly compelled to support her feminist beliefs, otherwise she would deny him access to her cunt, which to most men is a highly valued asset. So he would have been strongly motivated to be very, capital letters, male feminist with me in front of her eyes. So, it's to be expected, as masculinist and MGTOW ideas rise and rise, that there will be more verbally violent opposition to masculinist ideas coming from the male feminists than the feminists themselves, since after all, feminists, even the most rabid of them, have to be careful just how feminazi bitchy they are with men. Since if a feminist riles a man too much, to the point that he explodes in physical rage at her, he could break her jaw with just one bitch slap. Women are very aware of men's greater physical strength. In brackets, men are on average 3 times stronger across the chest than women, close brackets. However, this fear of the superior strength of men that women have is not the case with the male feminists, since they are men themselves. So they have the luxury to be as verbally aggressive against the masculists as masculists are against the monoconscious bigotry of the feminists. So it will be useful for all politically active masculists to be pre-armed with techniques to deal with the verbal aggression of the male feminists. So what to do? Question mark. Here are some suggestions on my part. Your first remark to a male feminist may be critical, since if what you say riles him, his mind will be closed off for the rest of the confrontation. So try to say something pithy that will stop him in his tracks. For example, quote, "If you marry and have kids, you'll face a 1 in 4 chance of being butchered in the fluffy feminist controlled divorce court system, losing custody of your kids, forced to pay for your kids, whom you'll barely be allowed to see. You'll lose half your wealth and half your stuff to her. You'll lose your house so your fluffy ex-wife can raise her kids in it. And if she's a real fluffy parasite, you may have to pay her alimony for the rest of your life, thus man-slaving you for decades. Man, you really need to learn some masculism, since you only know how men oppress women with your monoconscious male feminism. But in reality, women oppress men far worse with their man-slavery, their divorce rape, their forced fathering, etc. If you don't want to be butchered in the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts, then don't marry, don't have kids, and fight for the men-fairing of the gender laws." End quote. Then hand him a card with links to Masculist and MGTOW sites, so that if he is curious in his own quiet time, he can start educating himself into men's issues. Since he is already a male feminist, he's aware of gender political issues, so it should be a small step for him to start thinking that maybe men too have gender political issues with women. Masculists aim to convert large numbers of monoconscious male feminists to biconscious masculists for 2 main reasons. One is to liberate men from the oppressions of the traditional male role of being a man-slave to a woman for decades of his life, the core idea of masculism, that is, a rebellion by men against man-slavery. And the second main reason is to force women to become biconscious by stripping them of their male feminist boyfriends, who once they have become biconscious, then see the monoconscious ignorance of their feminist girlfriends as bigoted, hypocritical, since with their new knowledge of how women oppress men worse, with their man-slavery, divorce rape, forced fathering, etc., then complaining bitterly about how men oppress women, which is what monoconscious feminists do, seems profoundly hypocritical, so that these now biconscious boyfriends will become disgusted with their monoconscious feminist girlfriends and then dump them. As millions of monoconscious feminists get dumped, this will force them to examine what the masculists are talking about, and this exposure to masculist ideas will influence them to become biconscious themselves, so they will then be more likely to hold on to a boyfriend rather than repelling him with her disgusting monoconscious bigotry, believing that gender oppression is a one-way street. When masculists are dealing with male feminists who are more open to listening to what the masculists have to say, then the masculists can make the point to these half-open, half-male feminist, half-biconscious masculists that a biconscious feminist is much nicer to be with, since she will have had her monoconscious anger at men for the ways that men oppress women cancelled by her female masculine's anger at women for the ways that women oppress men. Such a biconscious feminist woman is much softer and far less feminazi bitchy compared to a monoconscious feminazi who has been brainwashed all her life that gender oppression is a one-way street, and hence feminists, monoconscious feminists, feel they have every right to be angry at men since men do such horrible things to women. But when such a woman learns that women do even more horrible things to men, with their many decades lasting gender crimes against men, e.g., once again, man-slavery, divorce rape, forced fathering, etc., then she loses her anger, since how can she possibly be angry at men for men's gender crimes against women when women commit even worse gender crimes against men that last decades, so are much more serious, even than rape, which is one of the worst ways that men oppress women. The above argument, that is, that it is in the male feminist's self-interest to have a relationship with a biconscious feminist who is nice and approachable than with a feminazi bitch, a misandrist, male-dumping feminazi cunt who hates men, even her male feminist boyfriend, since at the end of the day, in her mind, he is still male, a toxic male. If the male feminist cares about his girlfriend, the biconscious masculist can use the further point that it is in the monoconscious feminist girlfriend's self-interest to become biconscious, since she will be happier that way, because she will lose her anger and be much more nurturative with her boyfriend, since she sympathizes with him for the ways that women oppress men. Once the monoconscious male feminist boyfriend becomes well exposed and well informed as to how women oppress men, then he will probably then be self-motivated and can continue his gender political education on the masculist side for himself by watching lots of MGTOW and masculist videos on the internet, that is, interacting with the so-called manosphere, joining the masculist movement and contributing to the men-fairing of the gender laws, the fundamental reform of the divorce courts, the establishment of the GECs, gender equality committees, in the parliaments that consist half of female feminist and half of male masculist politicians, so that the gender issues of both sexes are dealt with equally. The masculist half of these GECs will then push for the men-fairing of the gender laws, the legislation of the PARA, that's paternity rejection right, the OPTAB, OPTAB, obligatory paternity testing at birth for all births to block women's paternity fraud, etc. The more committed these previous monoconscious male feminists become to biconscious masculism, the more likely they will join the masculist fight to change society and to men-fair the gender laws, looking back on his monoconscious male feminist days as living in darkness, in ignorance, not having a clue about how much more women oppress men than vice versa, and that this female oppression of men has to be stopped, hence the rise of the masculist and MGTOW movements. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 580 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.